Hi, everybody. I realized that I, ages ago, I did a video on my top 10 live albums of the 1970s. I haven't gotten around to any other decades. With the 80s, a lot of that is because much of what I listen to isn't from the 80s, or the artists were not putting out their best work at the time. And, or they started out great and petered off because of production and whatever. And so, I never got around to it, but the other day I was watching a top 10 live albums video and I went, huh, I never did the 80s. And so I don't have, I only have a few dozen live albums from the 80s, maybe. And I'll be honest, even a lot of them, I go, they're not my favorites by any stretch. So picking these was both difficult and easy at the same time. I'm going to start, I think I've only got the one CD to show. And that ticks me off because I had this on vinyl record years ago, and when times were a little tough, I had to sell a bunch of records years ago, and this was one of them. And I've got the CD back, and one day I will get the live record. Um, and this is one of the artists I was talking about. This is Rush Exit Stage Left from 1981. Yep. And so this is from the Moving Pictures tour. The sound on it is fairly slick. There was probably some touching up. It's hard to really like live albums when you know how much they've been touched up. And I'm going to get to that a bit later in the show here. Um, but I think it was every three or four live album, or three or four every studio records. Every three or four, they were putting out a live record. So the Spirit of Radio, Red Barchetta, YYZ, Passage to Bangkok, Closer to the Heart, Beneath, Between, and Behind, Jacob's Ladder, Brune's Bane, The Trees, Xanadu, Free Will, Tom Sawyer, La Villa Strangiato. This was originally a double album. It's classic Rush. There is a 4 LP set available, not of this, although I think a couple of the songs were taken from the show of Live in Toronto in March of 81 on the Moving Pictures 40th anniversary box set that I think is a better live album than this. But I'm only counting albums that were actually released back in the 80s, not excuse me, not not retroactive, not archival releases. So that's number 10 for me. I have a cup here that says "Life is too short for bad coffee." I've shown this off before, and I'm a complete hypocrite right now because the coffee that's in this was sitting in a carafe for hours before I poured it. Not very good. It's literally just existing to keep the cough at bay a little bit. Next, I'm going to kind of cheat a little bit, but I can. It's my channel. Um, I These two have been released at various points on the same CD or cassette, but they were originally two different albums. One released in '86, the next in '87, and it's Aerosmith Classics Live and Classics Live 2. Classics Live was recorded a little bit earlier, and it had Jimmy Crespo and Rick Dufay on some of the numbers. Train Kept a Rolling All Night Long, Kings and Queens, Sweet Emotion, Dream On, Mama Kin, 3 Mile Smile, Slash, Reefer Head Woman, Lord of the Thighs, and a studio outtake that didn't make it to their first record called Major Barbara. Yes, recorded various concerts between 77 and 83. This was recorded mostly New Year's Eve 1984 when the band got back together. And it has Back in the Saddle, Walk This Way, Moving Out, Draw the Line, Same Old Song and Dance, Last Child, Let the Music Do the Talking, which was originally a Joe Perry Project song. He had that in his pocket, and he was going to give it to the band for their next record, but then he left, took the song with him, had a minor hit with it, not huge. It was probably the best album. The first Joe Perry Project album was the best, I think. Hearing it here, it's great because Steven Tyler redid the lyrics, but it would not be on a studio record until done with Mirrors when they recorded it the next year. So anyway, and again, it's a tie, it's a twofer. It's a bit of a cheat. I understand that. I'm sorry if you don't like it, but I do lump those two in together, even though they were recorded not at the same time period. But it's like one big archival release to me. Next. a lot of people kind of crap on this one now, even though it was a sold, just huge amounts of records back in 1981 when it came out. This was the second live album by Bob Seger and the Silver Bullet Band, Nine Tonight. This, people look back and say Live Bullet's the classic, and this has all the pop songs on it. It does have the pop songs on it. We've got Tonight and Main Street and Night Moves. But you know what? I like those songs. I didn't grow up during this period, and so I'm 42, so all this old music is just retro to me. So I feel like my generation and younger, we were able to look at things perhaps slightly more objectively because these songs weren't played to death back then. But it's a killer. It was recorded at both Boston Gardens and Cobo Hall. And you got Nine Tonight, Trying to Live My Life Without You, You'll Accompany Me, Hollywood Nights, Old Time Rock and Roll, Main Street, Against the Wind, which is my favorite Bob Seger song, Fire Down Below, Her Strut, Feel Like a Number, Firelight, Betty Lou's Getting Out Tonight, We've Got Tonight, Night Moves, Rock and Roll Never Forgets, and the only song that's the same on both albums, the closer, Let It Rock, the cover of the old Chuck Berry song. And you know what? The Silver Bullet Band was firing on all cylinders here. Bob Seger was firing on all cylinders here. This is just great Midwestern pure rock and roll. I love this album. It's in my top 10 from the 80s. A lot of people prefer Live Bullet. Live Bullet definitely had more energy because it was a band on the rise. But you know what? This is a great album. And this is a great starting point if you're just getting into Bob Seger. And speaking, I guess, of starting points, I was going to talk about this one in just a little bit here. Priest Live from 87 by Judas Priest. To me, Priest has done better live albums, but this was my introduction. I actually just picked this up on vinyl this year, but years and years, when I was in junior high, I picked up the 2-record on 1 CD set of this, because I was just getting into heavy metal, and I thought, oh, this has a lot of the songs I recognize the titles from. And so this was on the, I think they called it the Fuel for Life tour, but it was really the Turbo Lover tour. Out in the Cold, Heading Out to the Highway, Metal Gods, Breaking the Law, Love Bites, Some Heads Are Gonna Roll, The Sentinel, Private Property, Rock You All Around the World, Electric Eye, Turbo Lover, Free Wheel Burning, Parental Guidance, Living After Midnight, and You've Got Another Thing Coming. It's like it's this live greatest hits album, basically. And I'm not a huge fan of every single song on here, but I like them. There's nothing I dislike here. I actually kind of like the Turbo Lover record. I don't mind the synths. They were trying something new at the time, trying to fit in. But still with songs like Metal Gods and Electric Eye and Free Will Burning, they were still they were classic heavy metal band. So this is in my top 10 from the 80s. It's a really good live album. It sounds overproduced, probably some touch-ups. But this just kind of holds a sentimental place for me because this was my starting point for Judas Priest. And you know what? I would argue that if you're trying to get somebody into the band, this is not a bad starting point, actually. It's fairly accessible while not being wimpy or cheesy. I'm kind of saving my favorite 3 for the end here, favorite 4. So I'm going to go in a completely different direction here. I've got a couple of blues albums. Now, Stevie Ray Vaughan kind of helped revitalize the blues in the late 70s and 80s, but there were some fantastic artists who had been around for a long time. So many of them criminally overlooked, and this guy is one of them. His name was Eddie Taylor, and this is called Still Not Ready for Eddie. It's on the Antones record label. Clifford Antone, of course, the founder of Antone's Blues Club in Austin, and the record label Imprint. Eddie Taylor was one of the great guitar players of the blues. And this is his last live recording that he ever made, and he made it for the Antones label. He was best known before this as being the second guitar player to both the classic blues players, Jimmy Reed and John Lee Hooker. And there's a picture of Eddie Taylor with a very old Jimmy Reed. And Eddie Taylor, yeah, it says here born 1923, died 1985. He was pretty darn young when he passed. Um, it opens with kind of his signature song called Bad Boy, If You Don't Want Me, Baby, Clouds in My Heart, which was a Muddy Waters song, Knocking at Your Door, sitting here thinking Big Town Playboy is fantastic. Look on Yonder's Wall is a classic blues song. Anna Lee, Boogaloo Farm. The great players on here, if you're not familiar with some of these, and it's maybe more to me and the few blues people who watch this, um, Eddie Taylor, Luther Tucker, Sunnyland Slim on piano, Snooky Pryor on harmonica, Bob Stroger on bass, who is in his 90s and still out there touring, Timothy Taylor on drums, Hubert Sumlin from the Howlin' Wolf Band plays some guitar in here. Ted Harvey from Hound Dog Taylor and the House Rockers is on here. And then Jimmy Rogers. I'm not going to either. Jimmy was in Muddy Waters' original classic lineup. And so, man, it's blues royalty on this. And if you've never heard this, and many people haven't, I admit I stumbled upon it by accident. And I was like, holy shit, this is a fantastic record. Really, if you're a blues fan, a classic Chicago blues fan, get this. Still Not Ready for Eddie. It was a posthumous release. It was put out the year after he passed. Absolutely essential blues right there. And speaking of essential blues, there were two albums by this guy, two live albums I could have picked. And I was really up in the air. But I'm going to pick this one, the first of the two from 1981 on Alligator Records. The master of the Telecaster, Albert Collins. Albert, his voice he had a tenor voice. He was a good singer, very emotive. Not as great as some of his contemporaries, but very soulful voice. His guitar playing and his musicianship. Holy mackerel. On here, and again, A.C. Reed on tenor sax, Johnny B. Gaden on bass, Casey Jones on drums, Alan Batts on organ. The only one I didn't really know on here was the secondary guitar player, Marvin Jackson. Frozen Alive by Albert Collins. I could have picked Live in Japan as well because they're neck and neck, but if this one is a 10 out of 10, that one's like a 9.5 out of 10 to me. Both just the blanket I have over my the quilt that I have over my chair is falling. Frosty, Angel of Mercy. I love that one. I got that feeling. Caledonia, the old classic blues song. The old Guitar Slim song. The Things I Used to Do is on here. Got a Mind to Travel and Cold Cuts. Very funky ending. This is one of those. If you're into hard rock and metal and you've never really explored the blues, it's actually a good one to kind of get in there with because it's hard driving, it's funky, it's soulful. This is a great album to own in anybody's collection if you're a fan of rock, blues, soul, jazz, whatever. Frozen Alive by Albert Collins ought to be in your collection. Live Shots by the Joe Ely Band. This was recorded when Joe Ely and his group were in England opening for The Clash. Ely and Strummer were good friends. There are a lot of stories that when The Clash came to America, they met up with some of the guys from the Panhandle, Texas Panhandle, Joe Ely being one of them, and The Clash actually rescheduled or canceled some of their shows, and they went and played honky tonks and everything out in Texas and Oklahoma, and they wanted to live the kind of life that Joe Ely and his band had been playing. And this is just a tour de force of a live record. Ely has always blended classic country with rock and folk and everything else. And coming up from the Panhandle, he said, you have to be creative up there. So his songs, Fingernails, Midnight Shift, Honky Tonk Masquerade, Honky Tonk, and the old Hank Williams song, Long Snake Moan, Had My Hopes Up High, She Never Spoke Spanish to Me, Johnny's Blues, Fools Fall in Love, and Boxcars, the latter two written by his cohort in the Flatlanders, Butch Hancock. This is a killer live record. The energy on here, through the roof. Unbelievable. So if you're a fan of Texas music, basically of any genre, pick up Live Shots by the Joe Ely Band. Now, this one, had to make the list. It absolutely must. For years, it was out of print. This again, it barely squeaks in. It's from 1980. This is the 2 LP Run Out Groove reissue from, let's see what year, 2021. I've got an OG pressing. I've got a CD pressing of it. Excuse me. But the original 10 songs, without even any of the bonus tracks, stand on their own as one of the finest musical statements ever made from Stand in the Fire by Warren Zevon. And this is taken from a short tour he did called The Dog Ate the Part We Didn't Like, which the humor, and I mean, Warren had that doomsday dark sense of humor, which many of us relate to if we're fans of his. Stand in the Fire, Jeannie Needs a Shooter, Excitable Boy, Muhammad's Radio, Werewolves of London, Lawyers, Guns and Money, The Sin, Poor, Poor, Pitiful Me, I'll Sleep When I'm Dead, and Bo Diddley's a Gunslinger / Bo Diddley. And, I could talk about all the bonus tracks, and they're worth getting, but if you only find the original album with the original 10, it's got all these pictures in it on the re-release here. This was Zevon at his absolute zenith. He was Stand in the Fire. He was on fire. He and the band brought the fire to the Roxy, the club in Los Angeles. And again, you talk about energy being off the charts, and to me, this is a 10 out of 10 record. I can put this on at any time and be in any mood, and it automatically makes everything better. And Zevon was just. It would not be long. He was supposedly clean here. He wasn't. Habits would get the better out of him in the coming years. He'd lose record contracts, etc., etc. But this is an artist giving everything he possibly had to an audience. It's amazing. All right, we're down to the last two, and this is the artist that I talked about. That there were 2 official live records, although 4 came out thanks to record companies. Motorhead, No Sleep Till Hammersmith. This is probably no surprise if you know me that Motorhead's really my band. I'm a fan of the second half of Motorhead's career. It actually took me a while to get into the first classic lineup of Fast Eddie Clarke and Phil Taylor. But even before I really did, this album, recorded over a 3-night stand, and it was actually not recorded at Hammersmith Odeon. It was recorded in Newcastle, and I forget where else. And I should have done my homework for that, and I'm sorry. But anyway, the original songs, the song track listing on here, opens with probably the definitive live version of Ace of Spades is on here. Stay Clean, Metropolis, The Hammer, Iron Horse, No Class. That's just side A. Side B, Overkill, We Are the Road Crew, Capricorn, Bomber, and Motorhead. And this particular vinyl reissue comes with Live at Newcastle City Hall, March 30th, 1981. The CD box set, 4 CD box set, which I also have down there somewhere, has all 3 complete shows, and plus the remastered No Sleep Till Hammersmith. This, if you're a fan of Motorhead and you don't have this, what's wrong with you? If you're a fan of hard rock and roll and you don't have this, what's wrong with you? If you're just a fan of rock and roll, period, this is essential. If you can't get your hands on the box set or don't want to shell out the money, get the single LP. You don't need. You really, the rest is great. It's for completists like me to have, the different box set versions. The original version of this stands on its own as perfection. This is, again, I like the song track listing better on other live records because I like Latter-day Motorhead, because that was when I got into them. But this is a classic, and it was the first hard rock album to debut at number 1 on the charts over in Great Britain. And kudos. This still stands the test of time. In fact, I will probably be playing this later tonight now that I think about it, because I've been speaking about it so much. Before I get to number 1, there was a schism in a band in Black Sabbath. And so, well, I'll just say my number one live album of the 80s is Live Evil by Black Sabbath. And at the time, they were rushing. They had Ronnie James Dio in the band, and they were rushing to compete with Ozzy, who was going to be putting out Speak of the Devil at the time, called Talk of the Devil over in UK and Europe. Um, I've seen many debates over this between the two. Not even close to me. See, this I'm showing you just for the sake of it, for the comparing and contrasting. This is not in my top 10. This is not amongst my favorite live albums. I almost never listen to this. I haven't listened to it in years and years and years because Ozzy went in and re-recorded every single bit of vocals on here. This is not, and I'm sorry, I know that live albums get touched up. Any time when the singer goes over and re-records his entire vocals, it's not a true live album at that point. And so I actually have the shows that Speak of the Devil was taken from, the complete Ritz 1982. Butch Jones, the great, the great music industry fellow, radio guy out of New York. He's got a Facebook page called The Butcher Shop, which I suggest looking up. He says Ozzy sounded like Carol Channing on here. But Butch champions this as his favorite live album because of Brad Gillis's guitar. You know what? Look this up and then look that up and compare and contrast for yourself. Even with Ozzy's horrendous vocals, because he didn't rehearse and he was gacked, I'll take this. So, that to me, that disqualifies Speak of the Devil right off the bat. But the musicianship on here, the shows, taken from the Mob Rules tour. Vinny Appice replaced Bill Ward on drums, Ronnie James Dio on vocals. He still had Butler and Iommi. This is the Super Deluxe box set. It has the 2 LP original remastered, plus a remix of the show, which breathes entire new life. It's like listening to it all over for the first time. This one, it actually, the new version lists Vinny as a full member. The previous one didn't. I'm not going to do a whole review on this box set here. I'm just going to pull out one of the albums just so you know the track listing of it. So here's the original remastered. E5150, Neon Knights, NIB, Children of the Sea, Voodoo, Black Sabbath, War Pigs, Iron Man, The Mob Rules, Heaven and Hell, Sign of the Southern Cross, Heaven and Hell Continued, Paranoid, Children of the Grave, closes out with the tape version of Fluff. It's a shame that Nonsense broke this lineup of the band up for years, and it took another decade before we got more music out of them, because this is it. This is the best live heavy metal album of the 80s to me. This is my favorite live album from the 80s. Of course, Dio was, in my opinion, and many, Dio was the best heavy metal singer there was. And this shows a band, even though there was some internal strife that went on, the shows were phenomenal. So there you go. I didn't really rank them, but this is my favorite from the 80s, my favorite live album. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this. Please let me know what your top 10 live albums from the 80s are. If you hate some of these, feel free to tell me, but please do so respectfully. As I've said many times before, I love talking music with you guys. That's why I do this. Just to shoot the breeze with people about music we like or we don't like or whatever. So I hope everybody's doing well, and thank you for your kind attention. Please leave your opinions in the comments, hit the like button, hit the share button, and hey, we'll talk to you guys later.